great pleasure in introducing Richard Morel. Richard is the one of the curators of paper money in the British Library and a meticulous scholar, and I very much appreciate that he agreed to give us a presentation today.
Before I dive into the text, I'm just going to give a bit of background context to the security printing industry, the environment of producing banknotes through Alfred Joseph Bull's career. So conditions during the first half of the 20th century created significant challenges for monetary authorities worldwide trying to maintain the integrity of their paper money. Technological advances in photography and printing, coupled with its increased affordability, really added significantly to the forger's toolkit. Likewise, the impact of 2 world wars on resources and fiscal policy further compounded this kind of problem. The withdrawal of gold and silver for the war effort necessitated the creation of various low-denomination emergency paper money issues, and many of these were rushed into production on an enormous scale and possessed few, if any, kind of security features early on. And again, this was made worse by the fact that the ink and paper qualities of such products were dubious since the supply of materials was compromised by military conflict. So consequently, there was a real favourable climate for criminal elements and enemy combatants to counterfeit paper money. And it might initially appear somewhat surprising that the official line publicly adopted by various governments around the world was that forgery remained a small-scale, localised problem. And this muted response, it actually becomes more understandable when we bear in mind that a crisis in confidence in the paper money system would have caused kind of social, economic and political anarchy. Talk is cheap and actions generally speak louder than words, in my opinion. And when you look at the archives at the India office and elsewhere, you begin to see a different perspective. Officialdom certainly wasn't burying their heads in the sand. Behind the scenes, governments worldwide did have concerns, and they were actively gathering intelligence, collaborating together and responding to these problems in kind of new, innovative ways. For example, in 1912, the director Joseph E. Ralph, shown here at the US Bureau of Engraving and Printing, felt the matter serious enough to consider hosting an international anti-forgery conference in Washington, D.C. Way over the other side of the world in South Asia that same year, David Petrie, then superintendent of the Indian Police's Criminal Intelligence Division and future head of MI5, published his landmark memorandum on Indian currency note forgeries. 2 years later, Petrie's report compelled the India office to liaise with the foreign and colonial offices in the development of a research and reference collection of world paper money. And this formed part of the India office's initial preparations to commission new Indian currency note designs, a thing which I'm going to return to later. Now, each note that came back was accompanied with an official covering letter highlighting the security features on certain notes and discussing the best ways to deter forgery. And what we have here on this slide is the India office letter dated the 19th of January 1914, addressed to the Hong Kong Shanghai Banking Corporation, the Chartered Bank of India, Australia and China and others, requesting those specimen notes. And beside them, these are the actual notes that were sent to the India office. So we have here the Chartered Bank Shanghai branch 1911 to 1922 issue $100 note, and of course beneath it the HSBC Shanghai branch 1900 to 1923 $100 note. So moving on to the Alfred Joseph Bull, the man. Specialists and collectors read in his obituary, published in the 1951 Proceedings of the Geologists Association, could be forgiven for overlooking his towering influence on paper money production. There's quite literally a single sentence in the entire obituary mentioning his work in this field. Instead, the obituary focuses on Bull's passion for geology and paleontology. And born in 1876, he was educated privately prior to graduating in chemistry at Birkbeck College. And his first job was as an analytical chemist for the Society of Apothecaries, followed by a role as a chemist to the Willesden Waterproof Company. A dabbler in photography, Bull joined the London County Council School of Photo-Engraving and Lithography in Bolt Court, Fleet Street in 1903. And it was here where Bull's passion for the natural sciences continued to take off. In 1917, he obtained a BSc in geology from the Western Polytechnic, Chelsea, followed by an MSc in physics, specialising in colour reproduction from the University of London in 1918. By 1937, he obtained his PhD in geology from the University of London for his research on the geological formations in the South Downs. Now, Bull held senior posts in the Geologists Association as well as the Geological, Paleontographical and Mineralogical Societies, and he contributed to and published extensively in their kind of journals. Now, written by geologists for geologists, this obituary really overemphasizes a mere fraction of Alfred Joseph Bull's diverse intellectual interests and pursuits. As a dedicated pioneer of colour photography, Bull's preeminence in the field led to his election as president of the Royal Photographic Society in 1933, and he was also a leading expert and pioneer in the field of printing, publishing books on photo engraving in colour between 1934 and 1945. These combined interests in his overall work oeuvre eventually led to his promotion as principal at the School of Photo Engraving and Lithography in 1912. And under his direction, this school acquired a worldwide reputation for its advances in photo engraving, photolithography, and photogravure printing. Now, in the first half of the 20th century, we've got to remember that England is one of the global centres for the security printing industry. Companies like Thomas Delarue, Waterlows, Bradbury and others were employed by organisations such as the Treasury, Bank of England, Crown Agents and India Office, in addition to monetary authorities worldwide, to manufacture documents and products like passports, banknotes, stamps and so on. And Bull's preeminence in the fields of photography, engraving and printing led to his employment by the Treasury, Bank of England, India Office and Crown Agents as a kind of a security printing and consultant for their paper money. And to date, he's the only individual I've encountered in the archives who works so widely across the board. Consequently, his work on paper money covers Britain, India, Burma and much of the British Empire and Commonwealth. His significance to the global international history of paper money is undeniable. We're now going to have a quick look at some of his work on the British material, in addition to his colonial paper money. Now, Bull's work as a security printing consultant appears to begin at His Majesty's Treasury. During the outbreak of the First World War in August 1914, the government decided to introduce measures for withdrawing gold from the circulating economy and directing it instead towards the national war effort. Hoarding of gold and silver during the build-up to war was already impeding small payments. So to ensure that the economy continued to function, government introduced a new low-denomination paper money note into the English circulation, particularly 10 shilling and £1. Now, the Bank of England was unable to print the quantities, the massive quantities required for them to be brought in quickly into circulation. So the government consequently took the unprecedented step to issue its own paper money called Treasury notes. This was not only essential, but it was an economic success, although the rapid production and circulation did cause problems. So their small size made them difficult to handle, whilst their lack of security features coupled with kind of public unfamiliarity with them, made them quite easy to counterfeit and palm off on the unsuspecting. And although the Treasury notes remained in circulation for years, they underwent several design revisions. Sadly, the pandemic's kind of made it impossible for me to go through all the files at the National Archives, but we've been in luck. One of my good mates, Tim Laws, who kind of pioneers research in Treasury notes, actually found one of Bull's reports there, dated the 24th of August 1916, where he's reviewing the various Treasury note essays from security printing firms for the third issue Treasury note £1, which was eventually issued on the 23rd of January 1917. So I've enlarged a portion of that report so you could get an idea of some of the content beside an example of the note. In 1917, government transferred responsibility for issuing 10 shilling and £1 notes across to the Bank of England. And this prompted the bank to establish a committee tasked with developing designs for two new banknotes now known to collectors as the 1928 Britannia Series A 10 shilling and £1 notes, which is shown here. Now, Derek Byatt's monograph, Promises to Pay, the first 300 years of Bank of England notes, reveals Alfred Joseph Bull was in fact involved in the production of these Britannia Series A notes. He also states that he worked with the bank as a consultant for many years in recognition of his engraving expertise. Again, the pandemic sadly rendered me incapable of going to work through some of the archive, so I can't say anything much more than that. But there's scope here for this to actually become an interesting book. Now, thankfully, as a former curator of the India Office Records at the British Library, I'm far more conversant on Bull's paper money activities for the government of India. And during a previous presentation for the ONS several years ago, some of you may recall I discussed the development of the tentative George V currency note issues that were in development as early as 1914-17. Much of the work was undertaken by Captain George Henry Willis, shown here, who was Deputy Master of the Mint in Bombay. And he was seconded over to Europe, arriving here around March 1914. And during his 7-month tour, he visited every British stakeholder involved in the supply of production materials, printers and distributors of paper money. Keeping a diary of reports of his research and visit, we know that Willis met Bull in the summer of 1914 to, quote, determine whether the designs on a particular material was proof against reproduction by forgery or not. An early predecessor for polymer notes, perhaps, I doubt it, but it was certainly, they're experimenting with the kind of papers and materials to print money on quite early. Now, Willis's work culminated in the creation of cardboard essays for the Indian currency notes between 5 and 10,000 rupee denominations. And all of them carry a bromide photographic image of Bertram McKennell's iconic cast portrait of King George V. And they depict watermarks incorporating the Star of India, devices and scripts in various fonts. And the borders carry some mechanically engraved lathe work, and each note differs in size, aid in value identification. And a set of these remained in London, now at the library, and another set went over to India with Willis in September 1914. This project not only led to the creation of the Government of India portrait notes of King George V, the knowledge acquired by Willis eventually enabled him to set up India's very first security printing press at Nasik by 1923. On the 13th of September, Bull submitted 9 colour proofs of a rough design for an unissued 5 rupee currency note in his own right, which we've got full sets of them here. Moving on, sticking with the theme of portrait, 2 years later, between January and February 1922, Bull's busily engaged in experiments to improve the engraving and security printing features on McKennell's George V portrait for the various pictorial series currency notes. We have these first proofs here, then we have these other proofs comparing his work with the bank and playing with the various overprints. On the 10th of April 1929, Bull submitted a report which shows that he was working on the India 1930 50 rupee portrait currency note George V, and in it he recommends all the various kind of benefits and drawbacks of some of the engraving techniques. He actually, quite early on, they're checking the quality of the work at Nasik with Bull, so sometimes him and Willis lock horns. Now, monetary authorities issued new banknotes generally in response to forgeries. Consequently, in addition to assessing new design features, papers, and so on, Bull was also tasked with examining forgeries to learn about the forger's techniques. And on the 23rd of July 1926, he submitted this report reviewing how the 2 Government of India 10 rupee notes shown here were manufactured. And he really goes into detail how they may have done it, how they, very technical and good fun for me, probably less so for the audience. So I'll just ignore that for now. Again, in 1928, the Crown agents required an expert to assess the security printing qualities of paper money notes submitted to them by the various printers as part of the tendering process. And after careful consultation with the chief cashier at the Bank of England in February 1929, they employ Alfred Joseph Bull as their consultant. And he holds this post up until his retirement 15 years later. And he was paid about £100 a year in 2 6-monthly instalments. And that seems to be the same that he got from the India Office and the Bank of England. So it was a lucrative business for him. Now, Bull worked on the Ceylon currency notes throughout that period. He really didn't like these uniface notes and these early kind of designs. So what you see him doing here, he starts off by introducing more colourful underprints and a more biface type note for the Ceylon 1926-1932 issue. And he was also a firm advocate and played a key role in the introduction of the George VI portrait notes into Ceylon from 1941 onwards. He likewise had a hand in promoting the security features for the Fiji 1934 issues printed by Bradbury, as well as the Mauritius 1930 series by Waterlow's, and that included his work on the very rare 1,000 rupee note. Now, at this point, Bull's reviews and advice was really almost sacrosanct. You know, he made the difference between a security printing firm getting a contract or not getting a contract. So, you know, he really was influential in all the core elements of what made a good banknote. A good example is shown with the Straits settlements 1931-1935 issue, where he was tasked with looking at various forgeries, by which he recommended the introduction of silk fibres into the paper, which is shown in this extract of his report. And here we've got Bull suggesting how the paper for the Malaya 1942 high value notes can be used to and improved to better secure against forgery. In addition to providing advice on papers, engraving, printing and design, Bull also had an amazing amount of fun in his capacity as a chemist, experimenting with the inks. So in January 1939, he undertook the following experiments on the British Guiana 1937-1942 issue notes. And he wants to compare these newer inks with the older inks of the previous issue. So as a bit of a laugh, he applied some washing soda to measure the rate at which the inks bleached. And he submitted that with the report next to it, where he basically says, the old inks were better, but these ones will do. Now, moving on to a more modern numismatic mystery. It's clear from Bull's extensive use of the School of Photo Engraving and Lithography headed paper, where all the work was being done. So he's doing it at the school, not at the bank, not at the Crown Agency. It's all being done where it is main mode of employment. And during the course of his work, there's a wealth of letters such as this one here, showing that he was given notes to keep for a reference collection from the Crown Agents and India Office. I strongly suspect the same would hold with the Bank of England too. Now, what happened to this collection? Where has it gone? Has it been broken up and sold? Is it in someone's attic? Or is it still actually at the successor of this school in some archive? If it's discovered, it'll be a major collection with quite a few big rarities. I'd like to finish up my concluding remarks. You know, I've had a look at a lot of his stuff for India, the Indian Ocean, Southeast Asia, and so on. But this selection here shows the real global coverage. These notes are the Bahamas government 4 shilling, the Bermuda government 1 shilling, the Jamaica 5 shilling, and the 10 shilling of Cyprus. I know from paperwork that Bull had a hand in the development of all these notes. So, you know, his influence was truly global. And as such, his life and career as a kind of security printing consultant does present real methodological issues to the numismatic community, particularly with regards to paper money. Generally, we look at paper money and take a national approach to it, or a by country and so on, and that does indeed have its uses. Yet in this instance, this more narrow national approach actually marginalizes larger, important meta-histories and narratives. And likewise, in what sense are we calling these notes national or indeed Oriental? Beyond being locally commissioned and circulated, the materials are actually sourced from the global market economy for manufacturing in the UK for many countries and other countries too. So America, Russia, France, Germany, you know, in addition to producing stamps and banknotes nationally, they were working across the world. Their designs and style as well, it can hardly be designated a national style. So one of my queries or thoughts at the minute is, should we be focusing on national, processual, or even institutional approaches in when we adopt this material? So perhaps widening it out a bit. I'll leave these thoughts with you now, and perhaps they can be returned to at a future date, because I definitely don't have any answers to those questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Richard.